Before we got to the current crop of incredibly creative craniums that mastermind the camera behind our cinematic pieces, African cinema had to crawl before it could run. Hello and welcome to African Entertainment Reviews. Join me, your host Uncle Omari, as we take a brisk walk and venture into the earliest bits of African entertainment history and appreciate the African filmmakers who laid the foundation for what African film today is. And before we get too far into it, be sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you like this content or any of the other content that you have found on this channel. So without further ado, let's hop onto that jet-powered ox cart and zoom right back into the past. So, the late 1800s to the early 1900s saw Africa and its inhabitants put on screen by Western filmmakers who used Africa as a backdrop and mostly depicted Africans as a brutish, barbaric, exotic people serving as the most extreme extras for the purposes of roles such as, you'd never imagine, slaves and or savage, cannibalistic tribesmen who are attempting to catch the lead role white man or woman in a bid to eat them. Yeah, honestly, the less said about this the better, but I can't promise that I won't do an AF-Rant about this particular topic if I ever feel the urge to purge my rage. In comes 1911, where we find the first film entirely produced in Africa, The Great Kimberley Diamond Robbery. This was filmed and produced in, surprise surprise, South Africa, which was closely followed by 1916's De Votre Cas, a movie that is arguably Africa's first epic film, as it was an on-screen depiction of the Great Trek, with this movie actually being made for and targeted towards the African locals. Towards the 1930s though, things got a bit cold for African creatives and entertainers. Take for example 1934's Laval Decree, which prohibited Africans from filmmaking within French colonies for fear of films carrying forward anti-colonial and propaganda messaging. A similar approach was also taken by Portuguese colonialists, theirs seeming more stringent however, as they left no footprints of filmmaking, even of their own creatives. However, on the other side of the continent, this being the eastern and the southeastern parts of Africa, mostly colonized by the British and the Germans, the Bantu Educational Kinema Project was established in the 1930s. This was mostly done for educational purposes rather than entertainment purposes, especially on matters such as hygiene. The British Film Institute still hosts 3 of the surviving films from this project to this day. I have no idea what these movies are, but now I'm a bit curious about them, so I will look into it, and who knows, you might actually hear about them from me right here on this channel. Anyway, back on track, the 1930s were a huge factor in the stagnation of the African filmmaking industry, as prohibition laws on African filmmaking greatly impacted the growth, study, and experimentation of film by African creatives. Cut to a few teen years later and if the 1930s established the Prohibition Era, then the 1950s were the prime teen years for rebellion. Thus, the world in the 50s experienced a boom in entertainment media crafted by African creatives. Sudan's Gadala Gubara created the documentary film Song of Khartoum in 1950, with Congolese filmmaker Albert Mongita filming The Cinema Lesson in 51. Mamadou Touré crafted Muramani in 53. Whilst Ponla Somano Viera and Le Groupe Africain du Cinéma filmed the short Paris, Afrique sur scène in 55. It is important to note, however, that most of these filmmaking endeavors actually occurred outside the African continent, as prohibitions within various colonies would still not allow the production of such films by African creatives. Within the continent though, foreign filmmakers were still allowed to mine Africa for content. One such major figure in the 1950s is the controversial French ethnographic filmmaker Jean Rouch, who filmed Jaguar and L'Homme Crafeux in 1955, Moi en Noir in 1958, and La Pyramide Humaine all before the 1960s. And despite all the controversy surrounding him and the fact that he is not an actual African filmmaker, I bring up Jean Rouch for one particular reason, which is his role in the development and the ushering in of a new crop of African filmmakers, such as Umaru Ganda, Mustafa Alassane, and more notably the mother of African cinema, the late and great Safi Faye. Now, I already have a video dedicated to Safi Faye and her filmography as part of a tribute to her recent passing, so I will not be discussing her deeply in this video. Feel free to check that one out. However, if there is a mother of African cinema, then who's the father? Boasting a phenomenally rich filmography from the 1960s to the late 1980s, Ousmane Sembene was dubbed the father of African cinema. Sembene's filmography consists of Borom Saré in 1963, arguably his most well-known work in La Noire 2 from the year 1966, Mandabi in 1968, Shala in 1975, Sedo in 1977, Camp de Thierrot in 1987, and his final credited film, Moulad. Now, it is very important to note that this moniker, the father of African cinema, was not meant to diminish the existence of or the impact of African filmmakers from the years past, as we have already listed a couple of filmmakers and their works that existed before the time of Ousmane Sembene. The title should also not eclipse other filmmakers who were active during that time period, such as the Ethiopian filmmakers Ilala Ibsa and Lambros Jokaris, who filmed Hirut Abatwa Manu, which is a 1964 feature film shot in Addis Ababa completely in the Amharic language. Quite practically, the title Father of African Cinema could be attributed to factors like Ousmane's film presence following the French evacuation from West Africa in 1960, the reformation and reclamation of African identity in film following the Laval Decree, the pioneering of the filmmaking industry in a space that lacked the infrastructure, funding, or resources, Ousmane Sembene's mentorship and inspiration of a fresh breed of African filmmakers within the newly found freedom, making Senegal the most important African film production hub in the 1960s and 70s, and of course the global acclaim that his filmography got. For the most part, this is what we know about our African cinema history before the 1990s. However, if I was going to do a video about this, I decided that I should dig just a bit deeper and see if the father of African cinema has a father before him. Enter Albert Samama Chikli, the man who I call the grandfather of African cinema. However, he could very well be considered the grandfather of world cinema altogether. The Tunisian filmmaker and photographer was actually a very fascinating man with quite a few accolades to his name, such as the introductions of the first bicycle and wireless telegraphs alongside the first X-ray machine within Tunisia. Focusing on filmmaking though, Albert was actually already filmmaking in the early 1900s, which is wild. The man is said to have caught the Messina earthquakes of 1908 on camera and supposedly took the first underwater shot in 1909. Man's basically paved the way for James Cameron's entire career. Chikli's recorded filmography consists of two 1909 documentaries, Bruges en Bruxelles and Antwerpen en Ostende, a 1922 short film Zora, and a 1924 feature-length film En El Ghazal ou La Fille de Carthage, all of which date far earlier than any other filmmaking records in Africa, thus cementing Albert Samama Chikli as the grandfather, the ancestor of African cinema. And with that, I would like to bring this video to a close. I hope you enjoyed yourself in as much as you learned something about our African entertainment history before the years 1990. Feel free to let me know your thoughts on the subject matter at hand, or even make suggestions for what you would like to see on this channel as we head into Subscriber September, where I will be doing videos that you recommend. Till then, feel free to check out this video on the state of African film and TV, or check out this one to familiarize yourself with modern African filmmakers and their beautiful works of art. I have been your host, your soon-to-be favorite Uncle Omari, and I sincerely cannot wait to see you all in the next one.